He didn't shout, didn't brag, just stood quietly behind the line, holding a worn M40 rifle. The young U.S. Marine snipers laughed, called him Grandpa, and told him to step aside. But when their high-tech gear failed, shot after shot, the old man took the rifle, and the impossible shot rang true. Before we dive into this powerful moment of humility, legacy, and redemption, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that true skill needs no spotlight, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this need to be heard. You wouldn't expect to find an old man like Henry Callahan standing behind a live-fire sniper range, not in the scorching Nevada heat, not wearing scuffed boots and a faded flannel shirt. He looked more like someone who should have been fixing a fence or sipping coffee at a diner, not holding a long, cloth-wrapped rifle like it was part of his soul. But there he was. A group of young, elite Marine snipers from Falcon Company were lined up, exhausted, frustrated, and dripping sweat. The air shimmered with heat, and their bullets couldn't land a single hit on the steel target over a mile away. Their ballistic computers spat out data, wind meters buzzed with readings. Nothing worked. Staff Sergeant Ryan Moore, sharp-jawed and cocky, was in charge. He didn't notice Henry at first, but when he did, the irritation on his face was instant. "Sir, you're not supposed to be here. This is an active military range." Henry didn't flinch. His hands rested gently on the old rifle, eyes scanning the distant terrain like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. "I know where I am," he said softly. "But you boys, you're fighting the wrong enemy." The desert wind had turned unpredictable that morning, dancing across the canyon floor in chaotic gusts. Every flag on the sniper range told a different story, and no algorithm could agree on which one was true. The young Marines of Falcon Company had been at it since dawn, sweating under the sun, recalibrating, repositioning, second-guessing themselves with each missed shot. The target, a small steel plate at 750 yards, hadn't been touched once. Staff Sergeant Ryan Moore, the kind of Marine built like a statue and twice as unyielding, was fuming. "What are we missing?" he barked, pacing behind the shooters. "We've got wind meters, thermal scopes, atmospheric data, hell. You've got ballistic computers worth more than your rifles." That's when he noticed the old man again. Still standing behind the line, still holding that antique rifle like it meant something, still calm. "You deaf?" Sir Moore snapped, marching toward him. "This isn't a tourist spot. Civilians aren't allowed past the red line." Henry Callahan didn't blink. He turned his head slowly, pale gray eyes locking onto Moore with a calm so unnerving it felt like silence had a weight. "You're shooting blind," he said, his voice steady, low. "The target's not the problem. The wind is." Moore scoffed. "Thanks for the homespun wisdom, Grandpa, but we're tracking 3 wind layers, Coriolis effect, barometric shifts." "You're reading numbers," Henry interrupted. "But you're not listening. There's not one wind out there. There are 3, one in the canyon, another over that ridge, and a third curling behind the boulders. Your scope only tells part of the story. But the mirage, she tells the truth." The silence that followed was uneasy. A few Marines shifted their weight. One of them, Private First Class Logan, glanced through his scope and then up at Henry. His hands tightened on the bipod. The old man's words made a strange sort of sense. Moore folded his arms. "And I suppose that rusted museum piece of yours can make the shot." Henry didn't rise to the bait. He simply unwrapped the cloth bundle in his arms. It was no modern tactical rifle, no rails, no suppressor, no digital scope. It was steel and walnut, a bolt-action relic from another time, a battered, beautiful beast of a rifle with a gouge on the stock that looked like it had a story to tell. Moore sneered. "What is that, an M40? Henry nodded once. "She's never lied to me." Logan swallowed. "Sir, I think we should at least let him." Moore cut him off. "This is not a sideshow. I won't have some groundskeeper embarrassing my team." But then something shifted, not in the air and the men. They'd seen the struggle all morning. They'd seen the calm in Henry's eyes. and for the first time, they weren't sure their staff sergeant knew better. Henry looked past Moore, toward the desert. "When I was 19, he said quietly, I was lying in the mud of a jungle far from here, wind in my face, rain in my scope. I had to make a shot like this, no meters, no tech, just breath, instinct, and trust." Moore stiffened. "Let me guess. You're going to say you were in Vietnam." Henry's silence was answer enough. One of the Marines, Corporal Davis, tall, skeptical, but respectful, stepped forward. "Sir," respectfully, "maybe we let him try. What's the worst that happens? He misses. So have we." Moore clenched his jaw. Pride battled practicality on his face. Finally, he stepped aside. "One shot. Then you're off my range." Henry nodded. He moved toward an open mat, slow but not weak, like each step was measured, not hesitant. He laid down, resting the rifle not on a bipod, but on a faded olive rucksack. His breathing was slow, methodical. Then he spoke again, not to Moore, but to the young snipers now watching in a hushed semicircle. "Watch the mirage," he said. "See the shimmer above those rocks at 900, it's dancing right to left. But look further behind the ridge, the grass leans back toward us, and that last flag at the target, she's lying. The wind rolls backward behind that berm. If you shoot into that current, your bullet won't curve, it'll sink." He adjusted the scope, no overthinking, just a few soft clicks. Then came the silence. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath as Henry exhaled halfway and fired. The crack of the shot echoed for a second, then a faint ping. Dead center. There was no cheer, not yet, just disbelief. Eyes widened, mouths hung open. Henry sat up, unsmiling. "It's not the gear," he said softly. "It's the understanding." He stood, wrapped the rifle, and began to walk away. Behind him, one voice finally broke the silence. "Who is he?" Logan whispered. No one had an answer. Not yet. Staff Sergeant Moore was frozen. That shot, clean, perfect, impossible, echoed in his ears long after the sound had faded. The others were still staring downrange as if the bullet might somehow change direction mid-flight and prove it hadn't happened. But it had. Henry Callahan, the man Moore had dismissed as a wandering groundskeeper, had done what none of them with their tech, their training, their expensive optics could manage all morning. Moore's pride twisted into something uglier. His voice was sharp and brittle. "That doesn't prove anything. One shot. Lucky." Henry didn't respond. He just kept walking, the wrapped rifle slung gently over his shoulder. His silence was louder than any retort. But someone had had enough. Private First Class, Logan the youngest on the line. Quiet, observant, stood up and broke protocol. "Staff Sergeant," he said, "we've been missing all day. You told us to adapt, to learn. Maybe this is what that looks like." Moore turned on him, eyes blazing. "Are you questioning my command?" "Marine." Logan didn't flinch. "No, sir. I'm questioning why we're ignoring someone who just hit a shot none of us could." Moore's jaw clenched, his fists at his sides. But before the confrontation could escalate further, Logan took a step back and lifted his scope. "Permission to take my optic to the armory. Sir, the heat warped the seal. Reticles swimming." It was an excuse, but one Moore was too distracted to deny. "Fine," he barked. "Go!" Logan didn't head toward the armory. Instead, he jogged behind the row of Humvees, pulled out his phone, and scrolled to a number saved under a name few dared call directly. Chief Warrant Officer Rhett George Rusty Barrett. But when he tapped it, it redirected to Colonel Franklin Ward's private line. Logan hesitated, then pressed call. 2 rings, then a voice, low and grizzled. "Ward." "Sir, this is PFC Logan, Falcon Company. We've got a situation on Range Echo." Pause. "Talk to me." Logan exhaled. "There's an older man here. Name's Henry Callahan. Staff Sergeant Moore tried to have him removed. But sir, he just made a 1750-yard shot with an M40. No wind meter, no spotter. Another pause. Then Colonel Ward's voice dropped to a near whisper. Did you say Callahan? Yes, sir. A silence heavier than desert heat stretched over the line. Son, stay right there. Do not let anyone lay a hand on him. I don't care what you have to do. I'm en route. The call ended. Logan stared at the phone, unsure what he had just triggered, but his gut said it was big. Back on the line, Moore paced like a caged wolf, throwing his hands in the air as the team murmured he was losing control. And he knew it. When Henry returned quietly to the shade of a weathered utility pole, some of the Marines shifted closer to him. Not obviously, not disrespectfully, just drawn, like gravity. Sir Corporal Davis approached, cautiously respectful. Can I ask, who taught you to read wind like that? Henry didn't look up. An old sergeant in Da Nang. He told me once, the jungle doesn't care about your rank. The wind doesn't salute anyone. Learn to respect both, and maybe you'll survive. Before Davis could respond, a strange sound interrupted the morning sirens. Not the kind used for emergencies on base. These were motorcade sirens. Everyone turned. A column of 3 vehicles came tearing down the dusty road, 2 matte black command Humvees and a white MP patrol truck, lights flashing. The convoy kicked up a trail of dust as it barreled toward Range Echo, drawing every eye. Moore blinked in confusion. What the? Doors flung open before the engines even shut off. Colonel Franklin Ward stepped out first, his face unreadable, his uniform immaculate. The sergeant major of the base, so he broad as a bulldozer and twice as grim, was right behind him. The Marines snapped to attention. Moore stood stiff, his confusion boiling into something worse dread. Ward walked past him without a glance. His eyes were fixed on Henry. He stopped just feet away and did something no one expected. He saluted, sharp, crisp, respectful. Mr. Callahan, Ward said, his voice carrying across the range. Sir, I offer my sincere apology for what you've endured this morning. My Marines failed to recognize a legend when he stood right before them. A wave of stunned silence rippled through the ranks. Moore's jaw went slack. Ward turned to the others. Marines, this man isn't a trespasser. He's not a civilian. He's the man who wrote the wind doctrine you're all failing to apply. He trained the men who trained your instructors. In '68, his call sign was Echo Phantom. You know those sniper tales they tell at the bar. Most of them, he's the man they were about. He gestured toward the cloth-wrapped rifle. And that M40, that's not a relic, that's history. Moore opened his mouth to speak, but the sergeant major's death glare shut him down before a single word escaped. Ward continued, and if Mr. Callahan is willing, he will now show you what it means to understand the wind. Colonel Ward stepped back, his boots crunching softly against the gravel of Range Echo. The heat bore down harder now, but no one noticed. Every Marine stood frozen, eyes locked on the old man who had just been saluted by the base commander, a gesture so rare it bordered on sacred. Henry Callahan didn't say a word at first. He simply nodded at the colonel, then turned to face the line of young, weathered faces, Marines who had spent all morning failing, now hanging on his every breath. I won't waste your time, he said, lowering himself slowly to the ground. His knees cracked audibly. He unfolded the cloth wrap again and pulled the old M40 from its embrace, like a father lifting his child. You've got all the gear, he said, gently resting the rifle on his faded rucksack. You've got tech I couldn't have dreamed of back in the valley of Pulak Ridge. But here's the truth. He looked up, his eyes sweeping across the squad. Gear can measure the wind, but it can't feel it. That part's on you. They were listening now, truly listening. Henry pointed out toward the distant landscape. See those rocks at 900 yards? Watch the shimmer above them. That's not heat, that's air moving. That's the mirage, and it's talking. Private First Class. Logan leaned closer to his spotting scope, eyes narrowing. It's flowing right to left. Good, Henry said. Now look at the scrub brush at 200 yards. See how it twitches the opposite way. And that grass just this side of the berm. The Marines scanned where he pointed. Little things they'd overlooked all morning, insignificant details that now seemed to glow with meaning. Wind isn't a single thing, Henry continued. It's 1,000 quiet arguments happening at once. Updrafts off the rocks, downdrafts from the ridgeline, crosswinds slipping through the canyon like a thief in the night. Staff Sergeant Moore stood rigid, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He hadn't said a word since the colonel's arrival, but his silence was no longer born of pride. It was the hush of realization. Colonel Ward stepped beside him. You had him right here, he said quietly. A living library. And you tried to throw him out. Moore's jaw tightened. Sir, I didn't know. Ward's voice was level. That's the problem. Back on the mat, Henry adjusted the scope with a few gentle clicks. No calculator, no kestrel. Just instinct and decades of memory. You're all looking for numbers, he said, his voice low and steady. But when the jungle was thick and the rain was warm and falling sideways, all I had was this. He tapped the side of his head, and this, he added, laying a hand on his chest. He settled into position. No rush, no dramatics, just a quiet, practiced rhythm. He breathed, exhaled, and squeezed. The crack of the shot rang out again. Every spotting scope trained on the distant steel plate. Ping. Dead center? This time, the Marines couldn't hold back. A murmur of awe rippled through them, not loud, not celebratory, just respect. The kind that came from having your world turned inside out. Henry sat up, nodding at the target. Wind tells a story, he said, but it doesn't shout. You've got to earn its voice. Corporal Davis stepped forward, crouched beside him. Sir, can you teach us how to listen? Henry's smile was faint. That's what I came here for. And just like that, the mood shifted. The Marines weren't leaning on their scopes anymore. They were leaning on every word that fell from Henry's lips. Staff Sergeant Moore took a step forward, removing his gloves. He approached the old man slowly, stopping just a few feet away. I owe you an apology, he said, loud enough for the whole squad to hear. I let my pride speak louder than my purpose, and I almost robbed my men of a lesson they'll carry for life. Henry met his eyes. Pride's a heavy rucksack, son, but you can always choose to put it down. Moore nodded. If you're willing, I'd be honored to learn from you too. Henry stood, his back a little straighter. He extended a weathered hand. Moore took it. And in that handshake, something passed between them, not just respect, but legacy. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched long across Range Echo, but for the first time that day, the wind felt still, and the men felt grounded. The next morning, Range Echo looked different. Not because the terrain had changed. The desert was still there, harsh and vast. The air was still dry. The steel silhouette target still stood silent over a mile away. But the atmosphere was new. Gone were the clipped commands and frustrated sighs of the Falcon Company's elite sniper team. Now, the Marines sat cross-legged in the dirt, their $30,000 rifles laid respectfully at their sides. They weren't peering through scopes, they weren't adjusting wind meters, they were watching him. Henry Callahan stood before them, a single blade of tall grass pinched between his fingers. The wind tugged it gently, and he held it up, letting the Marines watch it bend. Wind doesn't lie, he said, but it also doesn't speak loud. You've got to learn its whisper. He moved slowly, deliberately, like every word was loaded. He wasn't just teaching ballistics, he was handing down a lifetime. Staff Sergeant Moore stood near the back, not out of defiance, but deference. His arms were crossed, but not rigid. His eyes didn't judge anymore, they absorbed. He was a student now, just like the others. Henry stepped to the ridge overlooking the range. Most of you think marksmanship is a calculation, he said, scanning the shimmering heat waves. But shooting is observation. The math is the last thing you do. The first see, feel, understand. He knelt, pressed his palm flat against the dry earth. The rocks hold heat longer. That heat rises, causes distortion. Mirage isn't your enemy. It's your map. The shimmer tells you where your bullet will dance. Private First Class Logan raised a hand. How do you know when not to shoot? Henry smiled. When the wind is louder than your breath, wait. When your gut says something's off, but your gear says green light, wait. The group was silent. Even the birds seemed to quiet themselves as the old man spoke. By mid-afternoon, Marines who once relied solely on digital solvers were lying prone with eyes peeled for grass movement, mirage patterns, and even the flutter of an ant-sized dust devil on the far horizon. Henry stood beside them, whispering guidance. He didn't bark orders or give lectures. He guided a steady hand on the shoulder, a single nod, a gentle correction. It was teaching by presence, not power. And the hits started coming. Not by chance, not by luck, but by understanding. Ping! Another steel hit rang out this time from Corporal Davis, who had missed 10 shots the day before. His teammates clapped him on the back, grinning. Not a celebration of ego, but of growth. Henry nodded approvingly. You didn't fight the wind. You used it. Later that day, Colonel Ward returned, this time in a standard Humvee, without sirens. He watched quietly from a distance, a satisfied glint in his eye. When the session wrapped, he approached Henry and Moore. We'd like to make it official, the colonel said. The Corps is expanding its sniper program. We want to create a permanent segment based on your methodology. Observation first, instinct-based. Henry raised an eyebrow. You want me to write a curriculum? We want you to live it. You'd be the lead instructor, if you're willing. Henry didn't answer right away. He looked out at the group young faces now smeared with dust. Not frustration, eager, humble, present. They weren't just learning to shoot, they were learning to see. He turned back to the colonel. I'll do it, under one condition. Name it. No PowerPoint. The colonel grinned. Deal? From that day forward, Range Echo became more than just a sniper range. It became a classroom. Each morning, Marines sat in a semicircle in the dirt. No ranks, no titles, just students. Henry called it the wind circle. He showed them how a bird's flight pattern could tell you if a draft shifted, how a shadow's length could hint at thermal layers, how stillness was louder than motion if you knew how to listen. The Marines began calling his approach Callahan's Code. It was never written down. It didn't need to be. It was passed hand to hand, story by story, from one Marine to the next. A legacy reborn not with fanfare, but with focus. The days turned into weeks, and what began as an awkward encounter on a dusty range had quietly grown into something sacred. Each morning, the sun would rise over Range Echo, casting long golden shadows over the Nevada terrain, and each morning, a small group of Marines gathered not out of obligation, but desire. In the center of that circle was Henry Callahan. He didn't wear a uniform, didn't bark commands, and didn't carry any rank, but the authority he held was absolute, not because of what was on his chest, but because of what he carried in his eyes, decades of quiet wisdom, earned the hard way. And no one felt that more than Staff Sergeant Ryan Moore. He had once stood above the others, the kind of leader who kept his spine straighter than his understanding. But now, Moore sat in the dirt like the rest, a notebook in hand, scrawling thoughts between diagrams of mirage distortion and crosswind diagrams. One morning, after a particularly tricky lesson on slope shooting and reverse pressure pockets, Moore lingered behind as the others packed up. Henry was sitting on an overturned ammo crate, sipping black coffee from a dented thermos. Sir, Moore said, walking over, unsure of his own tone. Sir was a long time ago, Henry said without looking up. Call me Henry. Moore nodded. Henry, I wanted to say something. Henry took a slow sip, waited. I thought leadership meant never backing down, never being questioned, always being the one with the answers. Henry raised an eyebrow. And now I know leadership means listening, and sometimes Moore paused, then added with a soft laugh, knowing when to shut up and learn from someone who's lived what I've only read about. Henry gave a small nod. Good. The Corps needs more men like that. Moore looked down at the M40 resting across Henry's lap, its wood worn smooth, its steel darkened by time and sweat. Can I ask about her? Moore gestured. Henry's hand lightly traced the old gouge near the bolt. She got that in Nam. Mortar round dropped close. Shrapnel just missed me but found her. I kept her ever since, not because she's the best rifle in the world, but because she never lied. Moore sat beside him, letting the silence stretch. Back then, Henry continued, we didn't have data sheets or Doppler radar. We had instincts and mistakes, and brothers we didn't want to let down. He looked over at Moore. You ever lose someone because of a bad read? Moore's throat tightened. He nodded once. Afghanistan. Wind shifted in the valley. I called the shot too early. Our overwatch never made it back. Henry didn't offer platitudes. He just sat there, present, real. After a beat, he said, you carry it. Every day, Moore whispered. Good, Henry said. Because the day you stop carrying it is the day you shouldn't lead anymore. From that moment, their bond deepened, not as teacher and student, not as old man and young gun, but as warriors from different generations, finally meeting in the same language, humility. And Moore wasn't the only one growing. Private First Class, Logan, once unsure of himself, now acted as Henry's shadow, absorbing everything, helping guide the newer recruits who rotated in. He was becoming a translator of sorts, someone who could take Henry's poetic explanations and convert them into tactical applications. The young Marines even started crafting their own wind diaries, personal journals where they recorded mirage patterns, grass movement, wind shifts, and what each moment felt like, not just what the instrument said. Colonel Ward took notice. He observed from the perimeter, never interfering, but always present. One day, he approached Henry with a quiet proposal to have the Callahan Doctrine formally adopted into the Marine Corps Sniper School's advanced curriculum. Henry refused at first. I don't want my name stamped on something the brass will turn into another checklist. Ward smiled. Then you write it, keep it alive, keep it honest. So Henry began not with a laptop, but with a spiral-bound notebook, scribbled in longhand. He called it The Wind Listens. It wasn't just a training guide. It was part memoir, part philosophy, part challenge. And it ended with a single sentence. Trust the wind, trust the rifle, trust yourself, but only after you've earned it. For Moore, Logan, Davis, and the others, it wasn't just a new chapter in their training. It was a rebirth. They didn't just become better snipers. They became better Marines. It was a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after Henry Callahan had first walked onto Range Echo and changed everything. Staff Sergeant Ryan Moore stood in the gardening aisle of a small-town hardware store just outside the base. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans, a t-shirt, and a mind that hadn't stopped replaying lessons in weeks. In his hands were a few seed packets, tomatoes. He remembered seeing Henry with the same ones. He wasn't quite sure why he was here, maybe instinct, maybe unfinished conversation. And sure enough, down the next aisle, bent slightly at the waist, stood the man himself. Henry was scanning rows of fertilizer, wearing the same worn flannel, the same scuffed boots, and holding a small pot of basil in one hand like it was something precious. Moore hesitated. Then he stepped forward. Henry! The old man looked up, his face breaking into a knowing smile. Tomatoes not growing right. Moore blinked. How did you... I saw you planting them last week, near the PX parking lot. You put them too close together, roots are going to fight each other. He winked. Tomatoes are stubborn like Marines. Moore chuckled. A real one this time. The kind that rises not from amusement, but understanding. I've been thinking a lot about that week, Moore said, voice quieter now. About you. Henry tilted his head, listening. I used to believe the man with the best tools won the fight. Best rifle, best scope, best tech. But what you showed us, it's deeper. You made us stop measuring the wind and start feeling it." Henry nodded slowly. "Tools are useful, but too many young warriors treat them like they're truth itself. Truth's quieter than that. You've got to dig for it." Moore looked down at the seed packets in his hand. "Feels like everything you taught us was about more than shooting." "It always was," Henry said gently. "Sniping's just the surface. What matters is how you see the world, how patient you are, how much noise you're willing to shut out to hear what really matters." Moore looked up, meeting his gaze. "You changed us." Henry smiled. "You were ready to be changed. That's harder than it sounds." There was a pause, comfortable now, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the shared quiet of two men who had bled different wars and now stood on common ground. Then Moore cleared his throat. "I read your final line, 'In the wind listens.'" Henry's expression softened. "That line took me 40 years to earn." Moore repeated it under his breath. "Trust the wind, trust the rifle, trust yourself, but only after you've earned it." Henry placed the basil pot in his cart, then laid a hand on Moore's shoulder. "You've earned it, son." That simple sentence hit deeper than any award, any promotion, any medal Moore had ever received. It was the kind of affirmation that stuck in your ribs and stayed there. As Henry turned to leave, he paused again, looking over his shoulder. "Just keep listening. That's all the wind ever asks." Moore stood in the aisle for a long moment after the old man disappeared around the corner, feeling like he'd just finished reading the last page of a book he never wanted to end. Back at Range Echo, weeks later, a new group of Marines were taking their first steps into the sniper course. The mirage was thick, the air restless, and at the head of the line, standing tall with a weathered notebook tucked under one arm, was Staff Sergeant Moore. He didn't bark orders. He didn't quote manuals. He just waited. When one of the new recruits looked up and asked, "Sir, how do we shoot through this mess?" Moore didn't point to the wind meter or the laser rangefinder. He pointed to the horizon. "Start by watching the shimmer. That's the mirage. She tells the truth, but she whispers. You'll miss it if you're too loud inside." The recruits looked confused at first, but that's how it had begun for him too. Moore smiled. Somewhere out there, Henry was probably in his garden, coaxing tomatoes to grow not with force, but patience. And here, on this dusty stretch of range, his legacy was taking root in another way. No plaques, no medals, just whispers in the wind, and Marines finally learning how to listen. True mastery doesn't come from equipment, titles, or noise. It comes from listening to the world, to others, and to yourself. Henry Callahan didn't teach those Marines how to shoot. He reminded them why they shoot. He showed them that the wind, the mirage, and the earth beneath them were all speaking they had just forgotten how to hear. His story is not just about a Marine sniper. It's about a man who dared to live quietly, carry his legacy with grace, and remind others that sometimes the most powerful voice whispers. If Henry's story moved you, hit subscribe and tap the bell. More untold stories are coming. Share this with someone who needs a quiet reminder that true strength listens. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the wind has the final word.